All right, choosing exercises for high intensity, the right exercises for training to failure with AI soy jacks. So, first is there are not so ideal exercises when it comes to training to mechanical failure. So, a good example of this would be deadlifts, squats, barbell bench press, unsafe shit. So, by all means, these are excellent exercises. Most people build their bread and butter and start using these big three. But for a high intensity context, they're not always necessarily the best option. For example, with a deadlift, your lower back might be the limiting factor. This could manifest itself in two ways. Your lower back starts rounding, which is unsafe as you do higher reps to failure in a bodybuilding context, which is unsafe. And then secondly, it could just simply be that your back is giving out before your legs do, which means you can't train the targeted muscles to actual mechanical failure. You can't train the hamstrings, glutes to absolute failure because your lower back is giving out before the legs can give out. So with deadlifts, a great exercise, but not necessarily the best for training to failure. Now, granted, there are plenty of people who their abs and core can stay solid all throughout and their legs are what are the limiting factor. But for others, this is not necessarily the case, especially novices and beginners. Then you have squats. Very much the same thing. Your lower back might be the limiting factor. You can't get as best a mind-muscle connection because you're focusing on how much your abs and lower back are straining. Your lower back could start rounding as you start to grind out the last few reps. And then you have added danger with squats where if you get stuck at the bottom, you have nowhere to go. And to fail, you technically have to get stuck on a rep to truly fail. You can't just rep something and be like, all right, that was the last rep, that was failure. No, again, as I always say, failure is when you fail. So failing a squat isn't necessarily always the safest option. Now you can put safety pins up and all that shit, but then there's still a risk. And then if you want to drop set, you have to then take off the weights and put it back up. You could have a training partner do a force rep, but you can't always rely on people. You might start falling over. There's plenty of videos of people, helping someone try to get back up, and then the dude just falls over backwards on the guy behind him because they're just, exhausted. And that's an extra issue with these exercises. A lot of times, if you're doing, say, 10, 15 reps on a squat to failure, by the fucking 10th rep, your cardiovascular system, 9 times out of 10, is going to be cooked. Most big, strong bodybuilding enjoyers do not have the cardio to do squats to absolute failure. It's very fucking difficult, especially without resting at the top for 5-10 seconds. So that's another issue is when you're doing a full body exercise that requires skill. So there's a skill component involved, requires neurological adaptations. You might not be able to get everything out of it if your cardiovascular system's not there, your technique's not there, the weaker, smaller muscles are not on par with the legs or the muscles that you're trying to target. Next is a barbell bench press. Basically the same thing. You can't barbell bench press safely, albeit on your own, to failure because you will be crushed under the bar. Now you can set up safety pins, but then the safety pins have to be just an inch below your chest, which means you could smash the fucking barbell on it, fucking up your set, potentially injuring yourself from, a jolt of energy at the bottom. And so if you have those, sure, but then you could still potentially drop it on your neck if you're like really redlining, if you don't have a partner to spot you, then barbell bench press to failure is not necessarily the best ideal. And then for me personally, and many people that I've trained or just talked to, the barbell bench press taken to failure, oftentimes these smaller muscles like triceps and front delts give out before the pecs do. So it's not just a safety issue, it's also just a mind-muscle connection issue. Some smaller muscles like the lower back, triceps, etc., biceps on pull-ups, for example, will oftentimes give out before the bigger muscles do. And then just generally anything unsafe to train to failure, anything that requires a lower back stability, anything that requires a spotter if you don't have one, taken to failure is just not necessarily the best idea. So some more ideal variants we could switch to. There's nothing we can really replace the deadlift with. The deadlift is just a golden exercise. Now, with a deadlift, simply just don't take it to absolute failure. Maybe do a little bit of volume in this case. You might have to switch up to 2 or 3 sets of some reps in reserve until you develop the strength in the lower back to take deadlifts to failure. But there's not much you can really do. I mean, you could potentially do a lighter variation like an RDL to failure, but again, lower back. You could do an isolation movement like a hamstring curl, which will get you the hamstrings, but might not necessarily get you the glute development. But again, squats get you plenty of glute development depending on your foot placement. So yeah, you can't fully replace the deadlifts, but albeit you can do maybe a rep in reserve before the lower back gives out. It's such a systemically damaging exercise. A lot of times you don't necessarily need to take it to failure. The amount of times I've taken deadlifts to failure and not been able to fucking sleep that night because my central nervous system is just so tapped. I just don't, I don't really see the need to absolutely take them to failure. In the last 6 months, I've been training deadlifts 1 set to failure, but really it's when my back gives out. If I go for a few more reps, my lower back will round. And I've made plenty of progress from my deadlifts just from one set once a week with a rep or 2 in reserve. So yeah, you could potentially just, drive it back a little bit, not take it to failure. But with squats, for example, and many other exercises, there's plenty of options. With the squat, you could replace it for a leg press or a hack squat, where you can take these to failure safely, albeit so long as your machine has a safety mechanism. If your leg press doesn't have a fucking chain that will stop the weight from crushing you, then yeah, I mean, it's no different. Although with the leg press, even if it doesn't have a safety mechanism, the fact that you can take it way closer to failure based off the fact your lower back is no longer the limiting factor for many people, still superior. So if it has a safety mechanism, way better, because you can just take them to absolute failure. I don't want to hear the shit where it's like squats don't make your legs big. Look at many bodybuilders who don't squat. Dorian Yates is the best example. Heard he's back squatting. He's had some of the biggest fucking legs of all time, just getting really strong at leg presses. And hack squats. Hack squats, same thing. It's basically a squat now with no technical requirements, so you can really focus on the hypertrophy side of things. And your lower back is no longer the limiting factor. You can get a deeper range of motion, because many people can't squat that deep without their technique falling apart, their lower back being the limiting factor, or their posture just totally falling apart. So hack squats, you can oftentimes go deeper, get more of a stretch. It's a Tom Platz favorite. So hack squats, you can take them to failure, so long, again, you have to have a safety mechanism in place. In the barbell bench press variant switch, we could do a dumbbell press. With a dumbbell, if you fail, can't lift it anymore, cool, let it down, put it back on your knees or throw it away. And then you can also very easily just drop set a dumbbell press by picking up a lighter dumbbell. Whereas with a barbell bench, if you fail, you have to put it down on the rack, hopefully, then get up, take the weights off, lift it back up on the rack, put less plates on than the last time. By the time you've done that, it's been 2 minutes. That drop set's useless. So, and then a lot of these exercises are easier to spot. It is much easier to spot a leg press or a hack squat for force reps than it is to do, say, a squat force rep. I mean, you could have a dude stand behind you with his pelvis against your butt and help you lift up, and then he has to hope that you don't fall backwards because you're fucking doing 15 reps to failure. And I've seen so many videos on this exact scenario on the internet where dudes are helping a guy fail a squat, and then he truly actually fails, falls backwards, and the guy behind him gets fucking annihilated. So it's easier, it's less gay. They can just simply push the hack squat machine back up, or the leg press. The dumbbells are easier to pull up. So there's many exercises where there is just a slightly different variation that trains the muscles you're trying to train, if not better trains those muscles. I mean, the dumbbell pressing variation, for example, the barbell bench press gets you half of the way contracted. I mean, you can't really quite see it here, but you're try doing a barbell bench press in the air like this. Now do what you would do with a dumbbell press, where you bring your hands together, feel your chest contract that much more. So dumbbell presses is notoriously favored by bodybuilders because it allows you to feel your pecs far more. It allows you to fail through the pecs versus failing through the triceps. When I do bench presses, I'm tricep dominant. My triceps give out far before my pecs do, whereas with dumbbell presses, my pecs give out far before my triceps do. So it's not just a safety issue, it's also an efficiency issue. Will this exercise allow the targeted muscle to fail first, or is something else going to give out first? Next is standardization. So you need to find exercises that are easier to standardize. It is very important in high intensity that your reps and sets and exercises are standardized to a T, because you only have one chance once a week to progressively overload, and then you have 7 days before you can try again. Unlike with volume, where you can get away with a bunch of bullshit 3 times a week on the same exercise with 4 sets to basically fuck up a set with poor standardization, and then the next week you make up for it, or the next session you make up for it. Whereas with high intensity, you have one chance once a week. You need to make sure that a exercise has the exact range of motion every single time. so that you're honest. You're not falsely regressing and progressing through cheating the form. So even if you choose a great exercise, if you start using cheat form, it will mean nothing if you're progressing based off the fact you're cheating rather than getting stronger. So some exercises I don't like personally for standardization are barbell rows. One, barbell rows, again, the lower back is a limiting factor. So sometimes we sit up too high and then it's much more upper back and traps, whereas I don't get my lats hit at all. The lower back can start giving out before the lats do, so I can't really get that mind muscle connection. You start using a bit of body English because it's very standard for people to use a barbell row with, say, 60 kilos, and then 3 months later they're doing 100 kilos and they think they've progressed all this weight, when in reality they just started using a little bit of body English. A little bit of body English on a barbell row can seriously change how much weight you can use. It doesn't have to be very drastic. So you want to choose exercises that are very strict and be conscious that you're keeping the range of motion the same every time. Now, some exercises can be very difficult to do this, especially short range exercises. This is why I don't like the idea of partials in high intensity training. Now, partials are fine when you first failed your standard reps. So let's say you're doing an incline dumbbell press and you fully lock it out and you fully bring it down and you do a certain amount of reps within that range. Let's say you get 8 reps before you can't lift it anymore. Cool. That is the initial set done. Now, if you want, you can try and do a few partials, but those don't count as reps. You don't want to count the bullshit. That's just work beyond failure. Or with, say, for example, a barbell shrug or a shrug exercise, it can be very hard to tell if you're doing a full range of motion sometimes because it's such a short range of motion. And it's like, all right, from here to here is a full range of motion. But does that mean from here to here, like an inch off full range of motion is a false rep, or do I count that? Like, what do I count as a rep here? So some exercises can be a bit tricky. And for example, with a shrug, I say, okay, from here to about here and beyond is a rep. But if I don't get my shoulders from clavicles maybe here and beyond, then it's no longer a rep. And I'll keep going beyond that point. If I can't bring it here, I'll keep doing more reps because I got plenty of, I can get plenty more reps if I keep going from here to here. But I don't count those within the standardization of my program. So there are certain exercises like that, or like side neck curls, where it's like this short range of motion here to here. It can be very hard to get an obvious progression. Some days you'll be like, fuck, I got like 3 less reps in the last session. And it could simply just be that you like use slightly too much English rocking to the right to move your neck to the side. So some exercises can be very hard to standardize, and it is a matter of then choosing the best variation for standardization within that muscle group. So for example, again, the neck this way with the neck curls this way, this lateral flexion, whatever you want to call it, I found that using my hand to train against it is really good. I could get a good contraction there, but then there's no way of knowing if I'm progressing or not. So I got a neck harness, attached it to a weight stack, and now I do it with the weight stack as strict as I can to tell if I'm progressively overloading. But then also with certain muscles like that, where it's tiny, you know, progression is going to be really slow. And it's going to take much more time than something where it's very set in stone range of motion, like a dumbbell press, where it's just very obvious when I've gone from here to here, and when I fail, it's like I just cannot lift it. The resistance curve is excellent for standardization, and the range of motion is excellent. So some exercises are a bit iffy. You want to choose the exercises within that muscle group that are best for holding to standardization, keeping your reps honest. Which essentially ties into the next point, which is resistance curves. Some exercises are inferior for high intensity just simply because their resistance curve sucks. So a good example of this would be a cable pullover. The cable pullover is at its hardest when you're at the top of the range of motion. Pulling it from here, it's really hard, and then it kind of gets easier. Seldom if you get past this point where you fail the rep. And thus, the cable pullover is inferior to, say, a Nautilus pullover machine, where the resistance curve is hardest at the bottom. So with a pullover with a cable, you oftentimes will fail here, but your muscles have plenty to work with at this range of motion. So you would want to use a Nautilus machine where you would fail truly at the strongest part of the movement, rather than failing at passive insufficiency where your muscles are at their absolute weakness or weakest. So obviously this example, not everyone has a Nautilus pullover machine in their gym. So then you have to be creative. or use creativity. So for example, when I've done cable pullovers in the past, I would add a resistance band so that it would make it easier at the top where I was passively insufficient, and then make it harder at the bottom to replicate a Nautilus pullover machine. So certain exercises, you can change the resistance curves with bands or cable tension or whatever it is, or a spotter who does force reps, or maybe they make it easier at the top for you and then they let go and let you use the range of motion that you can actually work within. So with some exercises, there's no other option other than to be creative, but I just want to show that art real quick. It's pretty cool. That 𝗦𝗨𝗣𝗘𝗥𝗜𝗢𝗥 pretty cool. I don't know if you saw the other one. Did you guys see that one? No, that's the conclusion. That guy, yeah, that's cool. That's pretty cool too. I'm a big fan of 𝗦𝗨𝗣𝗥𝗜𝗢𝗥. But yeah, if you can be creative, you'll often get more out of these exercises, especially in a high intensity context. And that brings me to the conclusion. So you want to use exercises that are safe to fail in first of all. If it's not safe, then it's not best doing. It might be a really good exercise, but if you can't safely fail and you get injured, you'll no longer be able to train. Now, if you have a spotter, this changes things. Ideally, have a spotter for all of high intensity training. It gives you such a great benefit, but many of us don't have that. Secondly, is find an exercise that allows you to fail the muscle that you're targeting first. So if it's a chest exercise, fail through the chest, don't fail through the triceps. If a back exercise like a pull-up, fail through the back, not the biceps. And then lastly is to never use an exercise where you have a horrible passive insufficiency, like a pullover, where you are absolutely stretched out and weakest at the bottom, and you will be having so much more muscular damage and motor neuron recruitment in the tank had you not done that exercise. Had you used an exercise where you're failing at the bottom. Ideally, find exercises, if you can, where it's hardest, the peak contraction is the hardest part. Now, again, some of the greatest exercises I've mentioned in this video aren't that way. Dumbbell presses are most definitely not that way. You're passively insufficient at the bottom. If you can't get it off the chest, you simply won't move it. So there are plenty of exercises where that is just not the case, in which case you need to use drop sets and force reps. But if you can choose an exercise like a Nautilus pullover over the cable pullover, or creativity to use a band to change the resistance curve so it's hardest at the top, then by all means do that. And that's it. Hopefully that's been informative. Hopefully it will save you time, energy, pain, injuries, give you gains, whatever. Until next time, see you cunts later.